and there I was arrested because in the time that I've been hiking, Russia had invaded Ukraine, and and I've been aware of this. The situation had just got more and more serious. And by the time I reached the finishing line, the Russians were just not happy having a foreigner, a Westerner, walking around in remote areas. So they brought a bunch of spurious accusations of illegal journalism and photographing military sites against me, took me to court, found me guilty, and I spent 4 weeks locked up before they finally, thankfully, deported me. And that was back in May.
What was that like, going through that experience? How did that even take place? Like, why were you getting locked up? I mean, just because you were a foreigner in the war?
Pretty much, yeah. I have no doubt that had the war not happened, the invasion, then I wouldn't have had any problems. So yeah, it was. I mean, it's a police state now. It's a very suspicious place. That kind of Soviet era paranoia has just hurtled back into the society there. The police are very fidgety and jumpy. I reckon some of them probably genuinely thought I may have been spying. The allegations they brought against me more or less covered espionage. You know, photographing military sites is in a remote area of Siberia is kind of serious. So it was frightening. There was a while where I was fairly convinced I might get a 15-year sentence. Fairly convinced is misleading. Where I thought there was a good chance I could get a 15-year sentence. But thankfully, I still don't really know why, but after a month they deported me, and they were not wise to. But by their own metric, they had a decent prisoner who they could have swapped at some point for some Russian citizen or some. I mean that this is a bit different because this is directly in the war, but 5 British POWs were swapped. The Russians swapped them for some Russian POWs a few weeks back. So potentially they could have had an extra bit of, sort of bargaining fodder for a situation like that if they'd held on to me for longer. Thankfully they didn't. I think it probably worked to my favor that I was quite so far away. If you go to Pyongyang and then go about 2,500 miles north, that's kind of where I was. Wow. Really, sort of 6 time zones from Moscow, closer to, much closer to Anchorage than to Moscow or Kyiv, and probably about twice as close to the North Pole as to Moscow. So really just far away. And I think the distance of that probably worked in my favor to some extent.
Yeah, I'm sure if you were in Moscow, it'd be a completely different story. When they first arrested you, right, did they have access to all of your stuff? Like, I mean, because I know you were taking pictures and stuff, but not for the
reason. I mean, they had access to my phone, my camera. Thankfully, I managed to keep my journal more or less hidden from them. And there were a few SD cards. I've been recording audio for a podcast that I think is going to come out next month, a series of them rather. And that involved a lot of my thoughts about where I was, the people I was meeting, but also about the political situation in Ukraine or the military situation. And the SD cards for those I hid, and thankfully they never got hold of those. I mean, they were in their possession for a month, but they never found them. They were kind of quite well hidden. Had they found those, I think I would be in a lot more trouble.